He was the brightest spark America had ever seen, a man whose voice could electrify an entire generation. Yet behind the glittering jumpsuits and the thunder of sold-out arenas was a body quietly collapsing and a heart swallowed by loneliness inside the walls of Graceland. Even more haunting, those closest to him later revealed that in his final days, Elvis no longer recognized a man staring back from the mirror. How does a legend adored by millions fall into a darkness no spotlight could reach? Rare photos and untold truths will finally uncover why Elvis Presley remains one of Hollywood's most tragic kings, and why his story still echoes with both wonder and regret. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in a two-room shotgun house in Tupelo, Mississippi, a town where poverty wasn't just a circumstance, but a way of life carved into every family's daily routine. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, were already struggling to survive on meager wages, and the arrival of twins should have been a moment of double joy. Instead, it carved the first wound into Elvis's life. His identical twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn, and though Elvis would never consciously remember the moment, this absence, this ghost of the boy who never got to breathe, would follow him like a shadow for the rest of his life. Family members often said that Gladys clung to Elvis as if she feared losing the second half of a pair God had meant to stay together. It created a bond so intense that even as Elvis grew famous, the image of him as a child pressed to his mother's side never truly faded. Growing up, the Presleys moved from one cramped house to another, sometimes relying on relatives, sometimes barely able to pay rent. Vernon's imprisonment in 1938 for altering a check only deepened the instability of Elvis's early years. With his father gone, Elvis watched his mother work multiple jobs to keep food on the table. That fear of losing everything stayed with him long after he had millions in the bank. School offered little comfort. He was shy, soft-spoken, and often mocked for his long hair, his clothes, and his unusual closeness to Gladys. While other boys played sports, Elvis carried a guitar, the cheap $7.75 instrument his mother bought him for his 11th birthday. Neighbors remembered the boy sitting alone on the porch steps, strumming the same chords for hours, not because he knew where music would take him, but because it was the one thing that made him feel less alone. Church became a sanctuary. Sunday mornings were filled with gospel hymns, harmonies that lifted him out of the dust of Tupelo and into a world where voices, not money, determined worth. At the black Pentecostal churches he sometimes visited, Elvis watched singers move with unrestrained emotion, bodies swaying, voices trembling with power. These sounds would reshape him, blending with country, blues, and rhythm and blues to form the musical identity the world would later call revolutionary. But beneath his emerging talent lay a fragile core. Those who knew him as a boy said he carried himself with a mixture of humility and a quiet longing, as if he always felt he was reaching for something he wasn't sure he deserved. The insecurity, the need for approval, the hunger for love, all were seeds planted long before fame ever arrived. By the time the Presleys moved to Memphis in 1948, Elvis was 13, still shy, still unsure of his place in the world, but now living in a city pulsing with music. Beale Street's blues clubs, the gospel choirs, the street performers, these weren't just sounds, they were escape routes. He absorbed everything like a sponge, unknowingly preparing for the moment the world would hear him and never forget his name. Yet even in these formative years, the contradictions that would define Elvis's life were already taking shape. A boy destined for stardom, but unsure of his own worth. A loving son, yet emotionally dependent. A child surrounded by music, but haunted by silence. The silence left behind by the twin who never lived. And that inner emptiness, that quiet ache, would one day collide with fame in ways no one, not even Elvis himself, could have foreseen. When the Presley family settled into the Lauderdale Courts housing project in Memphis, Elvis was just entering his teenage years, a period when most boys search for identity, but Elvis searched for belonging. Memphis, however, offered him something Tupelo never could, the sound of a city in motion. Blues spilled from open doorways, gospel shook the pews of East Trigg Avenue Baptist Church, and country music echoed from every radio. Elvis didn't just listen. He absorbed it all until the genres blended inside him like a storm forming its own gravity. At Humes High School, he remained a quiet outsider, polite, soft-spoken, and still mocked for the way he dressed. He favored flashy clothes, long sideburns, and hair slicked back with more confidence than he actually possessed. Classmates dismissed him as strange. But Elvis wasn't chasing attention. He was chasing a version of himself he hadn't fully discovered yet. In 1953, a few months after graduation, he walked into the Memphis recording service, the front office of Sun Records, and paid $3.98 to record 2 songs as a gift for his mother. The receptionist later recalled that Elvis didn't stand out, didn't look like a star, didn't even sound particularly remarkable during small talk. But when he sang, something shifted. His voice wasn't polished, but it was sincere, a blend of gospel emotion and blues phrasing wrapped in a vulnerability that felt unusually raw. Sam Phillips, the visionary producer who would later launch Elvis's career, wasn't in the studio that day, but Marion Keisker, his assistant, scribbled a note beside Elvis's name. Good ballad singer. Hold. It was one word, but it was enough to begin a chain reaction that would alter American music. Months later, Phillips invited Elvis back for an audition. It didn't go well. Elvis was nervous, restrained, almost timid in the presence of professional musicians. The session was forgettable until the very end. During a break, Elvis began fooling around with Arthur, Big Boy Crudups blues number, That's All Right. The tempo was faster, the rhythm looser. His voice suddenly filled with a swagger no one had heard from him before. Phillips's head snapped up. Do that again, he said. What followed was the birth of something entirely new. Not quite country, not quite blues, not quite gospel, but a hybrid that would soon be called rock and roll. On July 5th, 1954, they recorded That's All Right. And the moment the song played on Dewey Phillips's radio show, the phone lines lit up with listeners asking, "Who is that boy?" Elvis wasn't ready for the impact. He wasn't prepared to hear his name echoing across Memphis. He wasn't prepared for girls to scream or for reporters to take interest in his every move. And he certainly wasn't prepared for the arrival of Colonel Tom Parker, the man who would recognize Elvis's potential not just as a singer, but as a commodity. Parker approached Elvis with promises of national fame, television spots, movie deals, and unimaginable financial success. What Elvis didn't know, what no one around him understood, was that behind the charming grin and carnival show confidence, Parker was already mapping out a future in which Elvis would be both the brightest star in America and the most controlled. But in those early years, none of that darkness had revealed itself yet. Elvis was simply a young man shocked by the world's sudden embrace, overwhelmed by the speed of his ascent, and unsure of how to carry the weight of a destiny he never asked for. The fire had been lit, the stage lights were warming, and the world was about to meet a phenomenon it had never seen before. When Elvis Presley stepped onto the national stage in 1956, America had never seen anything like him. He was 21, handsome in a way that felt both rebellious and vulnerable, with a voice that could tremble like gospel or roar like blues. His first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show drew more than 60 million viewers, over 1/3 of the entire U.S. population. The camera famously filmed him only from the waist up, but even that couldn't contain the frenzy he ignited. To teenagers, he was liberation. To parents, he was danger. To critics, he was a revolution they didn't yet have words for. Songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Don't Be Cruel, and Hound Dog didn't just top charts, they redefined them. Elvis wasn't simply singing. He was reshaping American culture, blurring lines between white and black musical traditions, pushing television censorship, and giving a generation permission to feel something louder than the era's rigid expectations. Yet even as he became the most photographed young star in the country, Elvis remained emotionally tethered to the one person who grounded him, his mother, Gladys. He spoke to her daily, visited often, and confessed fears to her that he hid from everyone else. To fans, he was a king. To Gladys, he was still the quiet boy from Tupelo who needed reassurance. This emotional dependence would later amplify the grief that nearly destroyed him. By 1958, with multiple #1 hits and sold-out tours, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army, a move that shocked the country. Colonel Tom Parker, however, saw it as perfect PR. Elvis would transform from rebellious heartthrob into an all-American hero. And in many ways, he did. Photographs from his military service show a disciplined, earnest young man, often tired but determined to adapt. Hidden behind those images, however, was the loneliness of being far from home and far from his mother. The turning point came quickly. In August 1958, while stationed in Germany, Elvis received the news that Gladys was dying. He rushed home, but he was too late. The grief broke something inside him. Friends later described him as hollow, shaken, and never the same again. The photos from her funeral. Elvis, with tears streaking down his face, clutching her coffin, are among the rarest and most painful images of his life. In that moment, the boy inside the superstar resurfaced, scared, lost, and utterly alone. After returning from military service, Colonel Parker steered Elvis into Hollywood. From 1960 to 1969, he starred in 31 films, a staggering workload driven not by artistic vision, but by Parker's obsession with profit. Many films were formulaic, lighthearted, and quickly produced. Still, they made millions. For the public, Elvis became the clean-cut movie idol with bright smiles and tropical backdrops. But behind the scenes, he felt trapped in roles that didn't challenge him, scripts he didn't believe in, and a schedule that left him exhausted. He began leaning on prescription drugs to cope with the demands, stimulant pills to stay awake, sedatives to sleep, painkillers for chronic injuries. At first, they were tools. Eventually, they became chains. Yet even in this grueling Hollywood era, moments of brilliance emerged. His 1968 NBC comeback special, dressed in black leather, singing with raw intensity, reignited the fire the world thought he had lost. It remains one of the most iconic television performances in music history. For a brief moment, Elvis felt alive again, doing what he truly loved, singing from a place of truth, pain, and unfiltered emotion. But that resurgence masked deeper fractures. The pressure, the isolation, the reliance on medication, all continued to grow beneath the glittering surface. Colonel Parker tightened control, locking Elvis into a punishing Las Vegas residency. The jumpsuits became brighter, the concerts bigger, the cheers louder, but the man behind the spotlight was fading. Through the 1960s and early 1970s, the world adored Elvis Presley as an untouchable icon, the king of rock and roll, the ultimate entertainer. But the rare photos from backstage, the strained expressions, the exhausted posture, and the growing distance in his eyes told another story. A story of a man shining brighter than any star on earth, while quietly collapsing under the weight of being someone everyone wanted, but no one truly understood. When Elvis stepped into the Las Vegas spotlight in 1969, audiences thought they were witnessing a rebirth, the triumphant return of a legend. But behind the blinding lights, a quieter truth began to take shape. The king was performing with fire, but living on fumes. Colonel Tom Parker had locked Elvis into a deal that demanded an unrelenting schedule. 2 shows a night, every night, for weeks at a time. The residency was profitable beyond imagination, but it came at a cost no one around Elvis dared to fully confront. To meet the physical demands, the sleepless nights, the rehearsals, the travel, the pressure, he relied increasingly on prescription drugs. Not street drugs. Not the image of the rock star addict the public often imagines. These were pills given by doctors who said he needed them to rest, to wake, to perform, to cope. And Elvis, exhausted and overwhelmed, trusted their authority. Rare photos from those early Vegas years show him grinning in jeweled jumpsuits, sweat glistening on his skin, every muscle in his face tight with effort. But zoom in on the dark circles beneath his eyes, the stiff posture, the forced smile, and a different story emerges. Friends later said that some nights, Elvis barely spoke backstage. He would stand in front of the mirror, breathing heavily, try to gather himself before stepping out again into the roar of thousands. Meanwhile, Parker was counting profits, signing contracts, negotiating expansions. To him, Elvis wasn't a man, he was a product, and the product had to perform. In private, Elvis's world was unraveling. His marriage to Priscilla was collapsing under the weight of infidelity, separation, and the emotional volatility brought on by his dependence on medication. Their once passionate relationship had become a cycle of distance and resentment. The rare, intimate photos from their Graceland years show a couple smiling, but with a space between them, a quiet void that widened as Elvis's fame grew louder. Elvis became increasingly isolated, surrounding himself with the Memphis Mafia, a circle of friends who loved him, but who also enabled his downward spiral. They followed him everywhere, backstage, on private jets, into hotel rooms. Some tried to help, others became lost in the orbit of wealth and power. But none of them could say the one word Elvis needed to hear: stop. His reliance on drugs deepened. Dexedrine to wake up, Quaaludes to sleep, painkillers for chronic injuries, barbiturates to calm his nerves, amphetamines for energy. It was a chemical carousel, and Elvis was spinning without control. And perhaps the most tragic part, he believed he was managing it. Because the drugs weren't illegal, he convinced himself they were safe. He told friends, their prescriptions, their medicine. But the dosage increased year after year, and so did the consequences. Weight gain, erratic moods, blackouts, slurred speech, moments of confusion that frightened even those closest to him. Behind closed doors, the king was not the conqueror audiences adored. He was a prisoner, trapped inside a body that was betraying him, controlled by a manager who valued profit over health, and haunted by the crushing expectation to remain larger than life, even as he felt himself shrinking, and the world had no idea how dark things were about to get. Escalation, loss of control, darkest backstage moments, emotional collapse. By the mid-1970s, the cracks in Elvis's life were no longer invisible. They were widening, spreading like fractures through every part of his world. What began as manageable exhaustion had transformed into something far more dangerous, a cycle of dependence that tightened around him like a noose. Backstage footage and rare private photos from this era reveal a chilling contrast. On stage, he radiated charisma, the legendary hip swings, the booming notes, the commanding presence. But seconds after leaving the spotlight, he would collapse into chairs, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Some nights, band members whispered that they weren't sure he would make it through the next song. His body was beginning to fail him, but the show, Parker insisted, had to go on. Elvis's weight fluctuated dramatically. His face grew puffy, his hands trembled, his once fluid movements became stiff. And with each change, he retreated deeper into seclusion. Graceland, once a place of joy, became a fortress, not of luxury, but of fear. Friends described long nights wandering the halls, consuming handfuls of pills, speaking in fragmented thoughts, drifting between lucidity and confusion. The Memphis Mafia shielded him from the world, but not from himself. Some feared confronting him. Others feared losing their place in his orbit. And so, the silence continued, a silence that allowed the spiral to deepen. Financial troubles added pressure. Despite earning millions, Elvis's spending habits and Parker's ruthless business decisions left him constantly in need of more concerts, more tours, more output. Parker gambled away fortunes, signing deals that pushed Elvis harder than ever. When Elvis expressed exhaustion, Parker would remind him of debts, responsibilities, contracts. It was a subtle kind of manipulation, one Elvis felt but could never fully escape. By 1976, the deterioration was undeniable. During some performances, Elvis forgot lyrics to songs he had sung thousands of times. He would ramble between numbers, losing track of his thoughts. Musicians would watch him anxiously, adjusting the tempo to accommodate his breathlessness. One night, he slumped forward at the piano, his eyes vacant, a glimpse of just how far he had fallen. And yet, in the middle of this darkness, Elvis still tried to deliver moments of brilliance. There were nights when the old fire returned, when his voice soared, when audiences wept because the king, for just a moment, felt alive again. These flickers of greatness became his last way of fighting back, of holding on to the man he once was. But the fight was becoming impossible. In the privacy of Graceland's upper floor, a place no guest was allowed to enter, Elvis withdrew almost completely. He surrounded himself with medication bottles, books on spirituality, and late-night television. His world shrank to a few dimly lit rooms where he battled insomnia, paranoia, and an ever-growing dependency on the drugs meant to help him cope. The tragedy was no longer subtle. It was consuming him. And while millions continued cheering the king of rock and roll, the man behind the legend was approaching a breaking point from which he would never return. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley was living inside a paradox. A man adored by millions, yet drifting further away from the world that once worshipped him. His decline did not come from a single blow, but from a series of moments, emotional fractures, physical collapses, and betrayals that pushed him toward an irreversible path. One of the earliest tipping points was the end of his marriage to Priscilla in 1973. The divorce wasn't just a legal separation. It was a collapse of the last stable piece of Elvis's personal life. Friends recalled how he wandered through Graceland afterward, touching photographs on the walls, as if trying to hold on to a past he had neglected but never truly stopped loving. In rare pictures from this era, he appears both regal and fragile, the king in sequins encircled by fans, yet with an emptiness in his eyes that even he couldn't hide. Then came the pressure from Colonel Tom Parker. As Elvis's health deteriorated, Parker tightened his grip further. When Elvis begged for time off, Parker countered with debt, fabricated or exaggerated, reminding him of obligations and financial responsibility. Those close to Elvis described cruel confrontations where Parker dismissed Elvis's exhaustion, insisting he was just fine and must continue performing. The manipulation wasn't loud. It was quiet, calculated, and relentless. But the most devastating shifts came from within Elvis himself. Years of dependency on prescription drugs caught up to him. His once brilliant mind, sharp, witty, quick on stage, began to falter. He forgot lyrics. He slurred speech. He drifted mid-conversation. The man who once commanded stadiums now struggled to command his own thoughts. The Memphis Mafia watched helplessly, some pleading with him to seek treatment, others too afraid to lose their place to speak honestly. In 1975, Elvis's hospitalization for hypertension and fatigue sent shockwaves through his inner circle. Doctors whispered concerns about his liver, his heart, his dangerously swollen colon. Issues tied directly to the drug regimen he insisted was just medicine. Still, after each health scare, he pushed himself back onto the stage, clinging to the one place where he still felt a glimmer of control. But even that sanctuary began to slip away. During a 1976 performance in Baltimore, Elvis struggled so severely that audience members exchanged uneasy glances. His voice cracked, his movement slowed, and he paused for long stretches, confusion clouding his expression. Fans who had dreamed of seeing the king were forced to witness a man fighting his own body. A backstage photograph captures this painful truth. Elvis sitting with his head bowed, sweat dripping, fingers trembling, a man consumed by a storm no one could stop. Another breaking point came when several of his closest friends, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, were fired at Parker's urging. Their subsequent book, Elvis, What Happened?, exposed the severity of Elvis's drug abuse to the world. Elvis felt betrayed, humiliated, and terrified. He had always believed his inner struggles were hidden. Now, they were being printed in black and white. Something in him dimmed after that. Those who visited Graceland in his final year described a haunting transformation. Elvis retreated almost entirely to the upper floor, rarely seen in daylight. He spoke of feeling watched, misunderstood, and exhausted by the expectations of fans who still wanted him to be the magical figure from the 1950s. His weight surged. His insomnia worsened. His dependency deepened. And though he tried to fight back with gospel music sessions, karate routines, and spiritual reading, the decline continued mercilessly. Each of these moments, the divorce, the health scares, the firings, the public exposure, the psychological unraveling, became stepping stones toward an ending no one around him wanted to imagine, yet everyone knew was approaching. Elvis Presley was no longer losing control. He had already lost it, and the final chapter was closer than anyone dared admit. By 1977, Elvis Presley was living in a world reduced to corridors, closed doors, and shadows cast by dim lamps in the upper floor Graceland. The mansion that millions of fans imagined as a palace of glamour had become something closer to a sanctuary for a man who no longer recognized the legend the world saw. Upstairs, an area now sealed off even to museum visitors, Elvis drifted through long, sleepless nights, weighed down by illness, isolation, and the chemical haze of prescription drugs. Those closest to him described a haunting routine. Elvis would wake late in the afternoon, restless and foggy, then shuffle between rooms searching for something. A book, a television channel, a memory that might anchor him. The man who once commanded stages with electrifying confidence now spoke softly, moved slowly, and often stared into space as if trying to locate a version of himself he had lost. Despite the deterioration, Elvis still tried to perform. In June 1977, he recorded Elvis in concert, a television special intended to show his connection with fans. But the footage revealed a painful truth. Elvis was pale, heavy, breathing hard, struggling to stay present. His voice at moments soared with the power of old, but his body lagged behind, betraying him with every step. When the cameras cut, he leaned heavily on staff members, exhausted by each song. Photographs from this final summer show a man trapped between past and present. The iconic jumpsuits hanging on a frame that can no longer hold them, sunglasses hiding eyes swollen from medication, a familiar half-smile stretched in across a face etched with fatigue. Yet even in this state, fans continued to gather around Graceland's gates. They prayed, they sang, they waited for a glimpse. They believed the king would rise again, as he always had. But Elvis was no longer rising. He was fading. In the early hours of August 16, 1977, Elvis spent the night reading on his bathroom floor, a habit formed from chronic insomnia and a constant search for solitude. Ginger Alden, his girlfriend at the time, recalled him disappearing behind the door and telling her not to fall asleep. Hours later, she found him unresponsive. Elvis Presley, one of the most influential cultural figures of the 20th century, had died at just 42 years old. The announcement shattered the world. Crowds flooded the streets of Memphis. Fans collapsed in grief. Newspapers printed headlines that didn't seem real. Even those who never considered themselves Elvis fans felt a shock ripple through the country, as if some essential part of American identity had suddenly gone missing. The initial autopsy cited cardiac arrhythmia, but speculation swirled immediately. The toxicology reports revealed high levels of prescription drugs, sedatives, opiates, painkillers, sparking debates that continue today. Was it neglect? Was it exhaustion? Was it the inevitable end of years of pressure, manipulation, and self-medication? No official explanation ever fully satisfied the world. But those who knew Elvis understood. He died from 1,000 cuts long before that final moment. And yet, Elvis's story did not end there. In the days after his death, thousands lined the road to Graceland for his funeral. Young, old, rich, poor, united by the voice that had shaped their lives. The image of the white hearse moving slowly past grieving crowds became one of the most iconic scenes of American pop culture. For many, it felt not just like the loss of a man, but the end of an era. But Elvis's legacy didn't dim. It grew. Graceland became a pilgrimage site. His records continued to sell millions. His influence rippled through artists across genres, from rock to country to pop. He had redefined performance, broken racial barriers in mainstream music, and invented a style that countless performers still imitate. The world didn't just remember Elvis. It kept reinventing him. Today, rare photos from his life. The boy in Tupelo, the soldier in Germany, the leather-clad hero of the '68 comeback, the weary king in Vegas, piece together the portrait of a man far more complex than the myth. A man whose charisma changed culture. A man whose loneliness consumed him. A man who lived larger than life and died smaller than anyone expected. Yet through it all, the music remains, echoing across generations, outliving the body that once carried it. And in that sound, Elvis Presley is still here. In the end, Elvis Presley's story is not just the rise and fall of a superstar. It is a story of a man caught between two worlds, the thunderous love of millions and the quiet ache of heart that never truly felt safe. He gave everything he had to the stage, to the music, to the image the world demanded. Yet he struggled to give even a small piece of himself the compassion he freely offered to others. His life reminds us that fame is not a shield. It is a magnifying glass, one that can amplify brilliance, but also expose the fractures underneath. Behind every rare photo, behind every smile held for camera, behind every triumphant performance, there was a man who carried wounds long before the world ever knew his name. A man who searched for purpose in the cheers, for comfort in the spotlight, for love in the noise. only to discover that none of it could quiet the loneliness waiting for him after the curtain fell. And yet, something of him lives on in every voice he influenced, every boundary he shattered, every fan who still feels that spark when his music plays. Elvis Presley was not perfect. He was human, magnificent and broken, radiant and haunted, a contradiction that made him unforgettable. As the final light fades from the stage, one truth remains. The king is gone, but the echo of his story, its beauty, its tragedy, its warning, still resonates, reminding us that even legends are made of the same fragile pieces as everyone else.